Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling something that can really supercharge your French vocabulary. Cognates. They can be a game changer, especially if you're aiming to master French grammar and maybe even earn that certificate.
Yeah. Cognates, they offer a fascinating peek into how languages are connected.
Right, it's like tracing words back to their ancient relatives, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing. Not all cognates are like our best friends.
Oh.
We've got the true friends, the ones that are instant vocabulary wins.
Yeah, makes sense.
But then there are those tricky false friends just waiting to lead us astray.
Ooh, I'm sensing a story here. So for our listener who's using Pronunciator and really digging into that library module, let's break it down.
Oh, yeah.
What exactly are cognates? Like, how do they work?
So in simple terms, cognates are words in different languages that come from the same ancestor, which is why they often look and mean pretty much the same thing. Like think of information or hotel, practically identical in both English and French.
It's like a 2-for-1 deal for vocabulary.
Yeah.
Makes learning new words way less scary.
Exactly. It's such a boost to see those familiar patterns and realize, hey, I already know a bunch of French.
Yeah, it gives you that solid base to build on, right?
For sure.
Okay, so those true friends you mentioned. Got any examples our listener can start using right away?
Absolutely. Besides information and hotel, we have like solution, nation, and transport.
Oh, yeah.
All pretty much identical, both in spelling and meaning.
See, I told you, reading French text already feels less intimidating.
Right.
And the Pronunciator app, especially that library module, I bet it's packed with even more of these true friends.
It is. You'll see.
Man, this is making me feel good about my French grammar progress. Okay, but now for those sneaky false friends.
Yeah.
What makes them so tricky, and how can our listener avoid falling for their tricks?
False friends, or sometimes they're called false cognates, are words that look and sound like English words. But, and this is important, they have completely different meanings in French.
Oh, that's got to be confusing. Got an example of one of these sneaky words.
Imagine confidently walking into a library thinking you'll borrow a book, but it's actually a bookstore.
Oh, I see the mix-up. So library doesn't mean library in French.
Nope. Not at all. And it's not just nouns. Verbs can be tricky too, like take attendre.
Okay.
It means to wait, not to attend, like you might guess.
Ooh, it's getting tricky. Sounds like we got to be super careful with words that look familiar.
You're right. But don't let those false friends scare you off. A little awareness and practice, you'll be fine.
So how can our listener who's using Pronunciator and learning about all this, how can they, stay aware and avoid those awkward moments?
The key is to pay close attention to the context.
Context.
The other words around a word and a situation can give you hints about what it really means.
So it's not just about memorizing a word, it's about understanding how it fits in. Right?
Precisely. And another tip, watch out for those little accents and special characters. They can often be the difference between a true friend and a false one. For example, résumé with an accent means to summarize.
Right.
But without the accent, resumer means to start again.
Wow, those accents are powerful. So being observant is super important when dealing with cognates.
Absolutely. And as you keep learning French, you'll get better at spotting those differences and knowing which cognate is which. And the more you immerse yourself in real French stuff, like what you find in Pronunciator's library module, the better you'll get at it.
Makes sense. It's like training your language senses.
Exactly. And it's not just flashcards. It's about experiencing the words in real situations.
Like reading French books, watching movies, even listening to music.
Exactly.
So speaking of that library module, it's really designed to help with these cognates, right?
Yeah, it's got all sorts of exercises and quizzes that go beyond just definitions. You actually get to use the words in context, which is super important.
So it's like having a French tutor right there with you.
Yeah, something like that.
As we're talking, it's hitting me that understanding these cognates, it can actually make your French grammar stronger overall.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you explain that a bit more for our listener?
Sure. Let's go back to information for a second.
Okay.
Knowing that it's a true friend, it can help you understand the verb informer, which means to inform more easily.
I see. So the noun and the verb, they're like connected.
Yeah, they have the same root and their meanings are related.
So one cognate can kind of unlock a bunch of other words and grammar stuff?
That's the idea. It's like a key that opens several doors.
I like that. And this works for other types of words too, right? Not just verbs.
Yeah, adjectives, adverbs, all sorts of things.
So cognates are not just about bigger vocabulary. They're about deeper understanding.
Precisely. And that deeper understanding helps you communicate better and avoid those tricky grammar mistakes.
Great. Now, for our listener who's trying to avoid those embarrassing moments, what are some common traps they should watch out for with those false friends?
One that gets people all the time is the verb assister. In French, it means to attend or to be present at,
right,
not to assist like in English.
Oh, that's a good one to remember.
Another one is demander.
Okay.
It means to ask, not to demand. So be careful if you're trying to be polite.
So those little differences in meaning can really trip you up.
They can. And a good way to avoid those traps is to pay attention to how verbs are conjugated.
Conjugation.
French verbs often conjugate very differently from English ones.
Right.
So by focusing on those grammar differences, you can start to see through those false friends.
It's like each word has its own unique fingerprint.
That's a great way to put it. And the more you use those words in context, the better you'll get a feel for how they work in French.
You know, this is making me realize that mastering cognates and false friends, it's not just about memorizing lists.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding how language is connected, how words are related to each other.
It's like seeing language as this big, fascinating puzzle where all the pieces fit together, even those tricky false friends.
And Pronunciator's Library module, it's like a playground for figuring out that puzzle.
Exactly. You can experiment, make mistakes, and learn in a fun way.
Speaking of figuring things out, I'm curious, you mentioned you like digging into the history of words.
I do.
Have you found any tricks for using that to spot potential false friends?
Yeah, sometimes understanding where a word comes from can give you clues. Like, take the word hotel in French. It originally meant a big townhouse in the city, which makes sense why it evolved to mean a place to stay, like a hotel.
So by tracing how the meaning changed, we can understand why it's different from the English word.
Exactly. And there are some great online etymology dictionaries that can help with that.
That's a great resource for our listener.
Yeah.
So it's not just about guessing based on how words look. Sometimes you got to do some detective work.
A little detective work never hurts. It's all about being curious and looking deeper. It makes it so much more interesting, right?
It does. And speaking of connections, have you ever noticed how some English words can be those false friends in other languages?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
It's so weird. Like when I was learning Spanish, the word embarazada got me every time.
Yeah.
It means pregnant in Spanish, not embarrassed, like in English.
That's a classic one. It shows that these tricky words, they're not just a French thing.
Right. So our listener who's using Pronunciator and really focusing on French, it's good to remember that other languages have their own traps too.
Exactly. It's about being aware that words can have different meanings depending on, the culture.
This has been so helpful. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of these cognates and false friends.
Good.
It's not just about memorizing. It's about understanding how language works.
I agree. It's about seeing the connections, the big picture.
Before we finish up, one last thing. We've talked about avoiding mistakes. But how can understanding cognates actually help us get things right in French?
Those true cognates, they can actually guide you towards correct grammar.
Right.
Like knowing information is the same in English and French. It can help you use the verb informer correctly.
So it's not just vocabulary. It's using those cognates to boost your grammar skills.
Exactly. And this works for other grammar stuff too. Conjugation, sentence structure, all sorts of things.
So it's like using those cognates as a roadmap for French grammar.
I like that. And the more you use Pronunciator, especially that library module, the more you'll see these connections and build your skills.
Well, this deep dive has been amazing. We've really explored these cognates and false friends, learned their secrets, their dangers, and how they can help us learn French faster.
It's been fun.
And for our listener, keep those aha moments coming. Celebrate your progress. And remember that language learning can be fun.
It really can.
Don't forget, Pronunciator is there to help you every step of the way. So keep exploring, keep practicing, and use those cognates. Bonne chance.